Number 1. Ramon Abbas, known to the world as Hush Puppy. Ramon Abbas, known online as Ray Hush Puppy, was one of the most recognizable faces on Instagram before the entire carefully constructed world he had built came crashing down around him in a way that shocked millions of people across the globe. At his peak, his Instagram account had more than 2.5 million followers, and his Snapchat carried over 1 million subscribers, and every single day he filled those platforms with photographs and videos of a life that most people could only dream about. Private jets, designer clothing worth tens of thousands of dollars, luxury cars, 5-star resorts, and dinners at restaurants that ordinary people will never set foot inside. He called himself the billionaire Gucci master. He described himself to his followers as a real estate developer. He lived in the Palazzo Versace in Dubai, one of the most exclusive residential addresses in the entire world, and he posted from that address with the casual confidence of a man who had earned every single thing he had through honest work and sharp business instincts. But behind every photograph, behind every polished caption, behind every video of him stepping off a private jet or holding up a designer bag, there was a lie, and not a small lie, not a white lie, but an enormous, carefully constructed criminal deception that federal investigators in the United States spent years unraveling before they were ready to act. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, working alongside international law enforcement partners, had been documenting his activities for a significant period of time before June 2020, when UAE investigators moved into his apartment at the Palazzo Versace and placed him under arrest in what became one of the most talked about moments in social media history. What they found when they began to pull back the curtain on his financial life was staggering in its scale and its complexity. Abbas was not a real estate developer. According to federal prosecutors who would later stand up in a United States courtroom and describe him as one of the most prolific money launderers in the world, he was a central organizer in a global network of cybercrime and financial fraud that stretched across continents and targeted businesses, law firms, and individuals who had no reason to suspect that the emails and communications they were receiving were not what they appeared to be. One of the primary criminal tools he used was a scheme known as business email compromise, in which criminals gain access to or imitate legitimate email communications between businesses and their partners or clients, and then redirect financial transfers to accounts under criminal control. Through this method and others, Abbas and his associates were responsible for schemes that caused or intended to cause losses running into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Federal prosecutors noted in their sentencing documents that during just an 18-month period, Abbas had conspired to launder over $300 million, though they acknowledged that much of that intended sum did not ultimately reach criminal hands. Among the specific crimes he pleaded guilty to were his role in helping to move money stolen by North Korean hackers from a bank in Malta in 2019, funneling approximately $14.7 million through accounts in Romania and Bulgaria. He helped launder millions of pounds stolen from a British company and a professional soccer club in the United Kingdom. He was involved in a scheme that caused a New York law firm to wire nearly $923,000 to a bank account controlled by one of his co-conspirators, after a paralegal at the firm received fraudulent wire transfer instructions through what appeared to be a legitimate communication. He acknowledged involvement in a scheme that defrauded a businessman in Qatar who had sought a $15 million loan to build a school, with Abbas and others playing the roles of fake bank officials and even creating a fraudulent website to maintain the deception. Abbas was extradited to the United States after his arrest in Dubai and was held in federal detention from that point forward. In April 2021, he pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to engage in money laundering. On November 7, 2022, a federal judge in Los Angeles sentenced him to 135 months in federal prison, which amounts to just over 11 years, and ordered him to pay $1.7 million in restitution to 2 fraud victims. The FBI's assistant director in charge of the Los Angeles field office said at the time of sentencing that Abbas had leveraged his social media platforms, where he had built a considerable following, to gain notoriety and to brag about the immense wealth he had acquired through fraud and criminal schemes. The man who had smiled from private jets for millions of admirers was now looking at more than a decade behind bars. As of 2026, he remains in federal custody and is not expected to be released until 2029. His Instagram account, which had once been a daily destination for followers who believed they were watching a success story unfold in real time, has since been permanently deleted. Number 2. Ruby Franck, the parenting influencer of 8 passengers. Ruby Frank was, for several years, one of the most recognized parenting voices on YouTube, a mother of 6 from Utah who invited millions of people into her family's daily life through a channel called 8 Passengers and built a following of over 2 million subscribers who tuned in regularly to watch what appeared to be a wholesome, faith-centered family navigating the ordinary joys and challenges of raising children in a busy household. Her content was warm and relatable on the surface, full of family dinners and school routines and parenting discussions that resonated with audiences who saw in her channel a reflection of family values they admired and aspired to. She spoke confidently about discipline, structure, and the importance of teaching children accountability, and she did so with the kind of composed, articulate authority that made her seem not just like a content creator but like someone genuinely worth listening to on the subject of raising a family. For a period of time, she was exactly that to a significant portion of her audience. A trusted voice, a familiar presence, a woman whose life seemed to represent something good. But behind the camera, behind the carefully composed family scenes and the confident parenting commentary, a reality was unfolding that was the complete opposite of everything her platform represented. And when that reality finally came to light in August 2023, it sent a wave of shock through not just her audience but through the broader public conversation about the responsibilities of people who build large followings by presenting their private family lives as content. The moment that broke everything open came on a summer day in August 2023, when a 12-year-old boy showed up at a neighbor's home in a condition that alarmed the neighbor enough to immediately call the police. That boy was Ruby Frank's son, and when authorities arrived and assessed the situation, what they found prompted an immediate criminal investigation. The child was in a state that indicated prolonged neglect and mistreatment, and the details that emerged over the following weeks and months, documented in court records and official plea agreements, painted a picture of what had been happening inside the Frank household that was deeply at odds with the cheerful, structured family life that had been presented to millions of YouTube subscribers. Investigators turned their attention not only to Frank herself but also to her business partner, a woman named Jodi Hildebrandt, a mental health counselor with whom Frank had formed a joint YouTube channel called Connections, described publicly as a parenting and personal development resource. After Frank's original 8 Passengers channel was suspended by YouTube in 2022 amid growing concern from viewers and commentators about the parenting practices she openly discussed and displayed on camera. Court documents and the formal statement of facts included in Frank's plea agreement described a pattern of treatment of 2 of her children, referred to in official documents by their initials, that included being forced to perform physically demanding tasks for extended periods of time, being denied basic comforts and necessities as a form of discipline, being subjected to conditions that caused documented physical harm, and enduring what the court characterized as physical torture and severe emotional harm. The court documents described one child being made to stand in direct sunlight for several days, resulting in serious sunburns with blistered skin. Another child was forced to carry heavy loads up and down stairs for hours and days at a time. The abuse was not impulsive or momentary, it was sustained, and it was carried out by a woman who simultaneously maintained a public platform dedicated to the subject of good parenting. In December 2023, Ruby Frank stood before a Utah court and pleaded guilty to 4 counts of second-degree aggravated child abuse, each of which is a felony under Utah law. She closed her eyes as she entered her pleas to the first 3 counts, and when she came to the 4th, she said, with her deepest regret and sorrow for her family and her children, guilty. Her business partner Jodi Hildebrandt also pleaded guilty to 4 counts of the same charge. On February 20, 2024, 5th District Judge John Walton sentenced Ruby Frank to 4 consecutive prison terms of 1 to 15 years each, meaning she faces a minimum of 4 years and a maximum of 60 years in a Utah state prison, with the exact duration of her incarceration to be determined by the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole. Jodi Hildebrandt received the identical sentence at the same hearing. At her sentencing, Frank addressed the court and said that for the past 4 years she had chosen to follow counsel and guidance that had led her into what she called a dark delusion, that her distorted version of reality had gone largely unchecked as she isolated herself from anyone who challenged her, and that she had been led to believe the world was a place full of threats that required extreme responses. Her YouTube channel, which once carried over 2 million subscribers and served as the foundation of her public identity as a trusted parenting voice, has been permanently deleted. She is currently serving her sentence in a Utah state prison. Number 3. Trey Sessler, known online as Mr. Anime. Trey Sessler is a name that carries a particular weight in the early history of YouTube, because he was not just any creator who found himself in trouble with the law. He was one of the founding voices of the anime review community on the platform, a young man from Waller, Texas, who began posting videos in September 2006 when YouTube was still in its earliest days, and the idea of building a community around a shared interest in Japanese animation was genuinely novel and exciting. Under the name Mr. Anime, Sessler built a following that numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and he did so through what his viewers consistently described as honest, unfiltered reviewing. He never softened his opinions to please an audience, he never chased trends for the sake of popularity, and he brought to his content an enthusiasm and a directness that made him one of the more trusted voices in a space that was just beginning to define itself. He also ran a second channel called LensCap Productions, where he collaborated on short films and creative projects with his older brother Mark, who appeared in videos alongside him and was described by Trey himself in public posts as his best friend. From the outside, looking at the channels and the comments and the community that had grown up around his work, Trey Sessler appeared to be exactly what he presented himself as. A passionate young man from a small Texas town who had found in YouTube a creative home and a genuine connection with people who shared his interests. But there were signs, for those paying close attention, that something was changing in Trey Sessler as the years passed, and those signs became harder to ignore as time went on. In 2011, he posted a video informing his audience that he had been diagnosed with a pneumothorax, a collapsed lung, and that he would be taking time away from the channel. He spent months in and out of the hospital, and when he returned to YouTube after that period, the content had shifted in a way that troubled many of the people who had followed him for years. The anime reviews were largely gone, replaced by videos about serial killers, mass casualty events, and school shootings. He expressed a particular and detailed fascination with the 1999 Columbine High School massacre, referencing it repeatedly in his content in a way that some viewers found unsettling. Investigators who examined his history after the events of March 2023 would note that his fascination with planned acts of harm was not new. It had roots that stretched back years, including a reported incident when Sessler was just 13 years old in which he described a plan to a school teacher, a plan that prompted concern and a referral to a mental health professional, though nothing further came of it at the time. On March 20, 2012, the community that had grown up around Trey Sessler's YouTube channels received news that none of them had been prepared for. Authorities in Waller County, Texas, responded to a call at the Sessler family home and discovered that 3 members of the family had been harmed by Trey: his mother, Rhonda Sessler, his father, Lawton Sessler, and his older brother, Mark Sessler, the same brother who had appeared in his videos and whom Trey had publicly called his best friend, were found deceased. Trey Sessler was 22 years old. He was taken into custody and placed on suicide watch at the Waller County Jail. In the investigation that followed, authorities discovered that his plan had extended beyond his family home. He had intended to proceed to Waller High School, his former school, and carry out a further act of harm there. The discovery of that plan added a layer of weight to a case that was already being processed by a stunned community. In the weeks that followed, law enforcement in Waller County described Sessler as a self-described loner who had cried during interviews while admitting to what he had done. The sheriff told reporters that what had happened was not the result of a sudden argument or a passing dispute. It was something that had built up over a significant period of time in Sessler's mind. On August 2, 2012, Trey Eric Sessler entered a guilty plea in a Waller County courtroom and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The YouTube channels he had built over 6 years were taken down. The community of anime fans who had watched his reviews and followed his creative work was left to process what had happened to someone they had considered a familiar and trusted presence. He remains in prison to this day, having expressed in subsequent years, according to reports, a degree of acceptance that prison is where he belongs. Number 4. Trevor Jacob, the YouTuber who staged a plane crash for clicks. Trevor Jacob was a 30-year-old YouTuber and former Olympic snowboarder from Lompoc, California, who had built a channel around adventure content and outdoor experiences, and who on November 24, 2021, took off from Lompoc City Airport on what he described as a solo flight to Mammoth Lakes, California, in a vintage 1940 Taylorcraft single-engine aircraft. What made this flight different from any ordinary solo journey, and what would eventually lead Trevor Jacob to stand before a federal judge and be sentenced to 6 months in prison, was that the aircraft had been fitted with multiple cameras before takeoff. on the wing, on the tail, and held in Jacob's own hand, and that Jacob himself boarded the plane already wearing a parachute, which is not standard practice for a routine flight in a small single-engine aircraft. At some point during the flight, as those cameras were rolling and recording everything, Jacob stepped out of the side door of the aircraft and parachuted down toward the Los Padres National Forest in Santa Barbara County, leaving the plane without a pilot. The aircraft came down in the forest. Jacob, who was an experienced pilot and an experienced skydiver, descended safely and hiked to the location of the wreckage to retrieve the footage from the cameras mounted on the plane. He then reported the incident to the National Transportation Safety Board, described it as an engine failure, and told federal investigators that he had parachuted because he could not identify a safe place to land. He agreed to provide investigators with the coordinates of the downed aircraft and to preserve the wreckage until they could examine it, which is a standard legal requirement in aviation incidents. He did not do that. Instead, according to federal prosecutors, Jacob and a friend chartered a helicopter, flew to the crash site, retrieved the wreckage, brought it back to Santa Maria where Jacob's pickup truck was waiting, and then cut the aircraft apart and placed the pieces in the garbage in sections, systematically destroying the evidence that federal investigators had been waiting to examine. He also ceased cooperating with the investigation entirely and told investigators he did not know where the wreck was, even as he was in the process of disposing of it. In December 2021, he posted the video to his YouTube channel under the title "I Crashed My Airplane," and it accumulated millions of views. The video included branded content promoting a wallet company that had sponsored him, which was the commercial purpose behind the entire staged event. Jacob had arranged the sponsorship deal in advance and agreed to create a dramatic video promoting the wallet brand. The Federal Aviation Administration reviewed the incident, concluded that Jacob had intentionally abandoned the aircraft, revoked his pilot's license in April 2022, and referred the matter to federal prosecutors. The investigation that followed was conducted by the FAA, the National Transportation Safety Board, and the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General, all working together with the United States Attorney's Office for the Central District of California. In May 2023, it was announced that Jacob would plead guilty to one federal count of destruction and concealment with the intent to obstruct a federal investigation. On December 4, 2023, United States District Judge John F. Walter sentenced Trevor Jacob to 6 months in federal prison, noting that he had exercised exceptionally poor judgment in committing the offense and that the conduct had been motivated by a desire for social media attention and financial gain. Prosecutors wrote in their sentencing memorandum that this type of daredevil conduct could not be tolerated. His YouTube channel, which had carried his adventure content for years, was still active at the time of sentencing with around 143,000 subscribers. He posted a video shortly before reporting to prison in which he told his audience that life had thrown him certain situations that force you to grow up, and that this was exactly what this was. Number 5. Jebera Igbara, known online as Jay Mazzini. Jebera Igbara built his Instagram presence under the name Jay Mazzini on a very specific and very effective kind of content. Videos in which he appeared to give away large amounts of cash to ordinary people, handing out money on the street, surprising strangers, performing acts of generosity that his growing audience found compelling and heartwarming, and that positioned him in the minds of his followers as a wealthy, generous man of faith who used his resources to lift others up. His account attracted a significant and loyal following, and he was particularly well regarded and trusted within Muslim communities in the New York area, where he was known not just as a social media figure, but as someone who presented himself as a successful crypto investor and businessman with both the means and the desire to share his good fortune with those around him. The cash giveaway videos were his signature content. They were the thing that made his account distinctive, the thing that people shared and talked about, the thing that made his followers feel that in following Jay Mazzini they were connected to someone genuinely good. What those followers did not know, what the people who gave him their trust and their investment money did not know, was that the entire presentation was a fraud, that the wealth he displayed and the generosity he performed were both financed through criminal schemes, and that behind the persona of the giving, faith-centered benefactor was a man who was systematically deceiving the very communities that admired him most. According to the federal charges brought against him by prosecutors in the Eastern District of New York, Igbara ran multiple overlapping fraud schemes that collectively caused losses of at least $8 million to investors who had trusted him with their money based on his social media reputation and the confidence he projected. He told investors he was a successful cryptocurrency trader with a documented track record of returns. He solicited investments from members of his community, including people from the Muslim community in New York who had come to know him through his platform and who believed they were participating in a legitimate investment opportunity. The money they gave him, according to investigators and the evidence presented in federal court, was not invested as promised. It was spent and gambled away, used to finance the lifestyle and the performances of generosity that kept his social media persona alive and growing. In March 2021, his Instagram account was taken down, and not long afterward, federal investigators moved against him. He was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and money laundering. He pleaded guilty to those charges in November 2022. On September 24, 2024, United States District Judge Frederick Block sentenced Jebera Igbara to 84 months in federal prison, which amounts to 7 years, for his role in the overlapping fraud schemes. At sentencing, an IRS criminal investigation special agent stated that Igbara had created a fake online presence to present himself as a wealthy crypto investor, and then used that persona as proof of success when convincing unsuspecting victims to invest in his schemes, before spending and gambling away the money that trusting members of his community had placed in his hands. The prosecutor noted that he had conned a New York Muslim community out of millions and shown no regard for the people he affected. Number 6. Anthime Gionnet, known online as Baked Alaska. Anthime Gionnet had spent years building a social media following through a particular style of content that combined live streaming, confrontational public behavior, and an increasingly vocal alignment with far-right political ideas, and by January 6, 2021, he had accumulated an audience of more than 120,000 followers on Twitter and a broader presence across multiple platforms including Twitch, where he regularly live-streamed his activities to audiences who tuned in, specifically to watch him provoke, agitate, and document the edges of what was legally and socially permissible. Before his career took the direction it did, Gionnet had worked in the music industry and had held a position at BuzzFeed, the news and entertainment website, which made his eventual transformation into one of the more recognizable faces of the online far-right a notable biographical arc. On January 6, 2021, as a large group of people who had gathered in Washington, D.C. in support of then-President Donald Trump's claims about the 2020 presidential election moved toward and then into the United States Capitol building, Anthime Gionnet was among them, and he was doing what he always did, he was live-streaming. He broadcast his participation in the events of that day to approximately 16,000 people who were watching his feed in real time as he moved through the Capitol building, entered the offices of sitting United States senators, encouraged those around him to come inside and make themselves at home, chanted slogans, and at one point picked up a phone in a senator's office and pretended to place a call, making claims about the 2020 election. He entered the Capitol on 2 separate occasions during the events of that day. His own footage, the live stream he had broadcast to thousands of followers with the apparent intention of documenting and celebrating what was happening, became a central piece of evidence against him when federal investigators began building their cases against those who had participated in the Capitol breach. The footage was so comprehensive and so clear that it not only documented Gionnet's own participation but also helped law enforcement identify and build cases against other individuals who had been present alongside him. He was arrested in January 2021 in connection with the events of that day. His path through the legal process was not entirely straightforward. At a hearing in 2022, he told the presiding judge that he actually believed himself to be innocent, which disrupted a plea arrangement and prompted the court to set a trial date before prosecutors extended the opportunity to plead guilty once more. He ultimately pleaded guilty in July 2022 to 1 misdemeanor count of parading, demonstrating, or picketing inside a Capitol building. On January 10, 2023, United States District Judge Trevor McFadden sentenced Anthime Gionnet to 60 days in prison, 2 years of probation, and fines totaling $2,500. At the sentencing hearing, Judge McFadden told Gionnet directly that he had done everything he could to publicize his misconduct, that he had live-streamed his criminal conduct to thousands of followers hoping they would pay him for his actions, and that he had been there encouraging and participating fully in what was going on. The judge also noted that the event Gionnet had participated in and promoted from inside the Capitol was a national tragedy. Gionnet did not address the court during the sentencing hearing. Number 7. Danielle Miller, the lifestyle influencer who stole pandemic relief funds. Danielle Miller was a social media influencer based in Massachusetts who, during the period of the COVID-19 pandemic, when federal and state governments were distributing emergency financial assistance to workers and small businesses who had lost income due to the economic disruption caused by the health crisis, chose to exploit those relief systems through a sustained scheme of identity theft and fraudulent applications that targeted programs specifically designed to help people in genuine financial need. The details of her scheme, as documented in federal court records and the official statement of the United States Attorney for the District of Massachusetts, describe a pattern of criminal conduct that was deliberate, repeated, and specifically directed at systems that existed to provide a safety net for vulnerable people during one of the most economically difficult periods in recent history. Miller, who was 32 years old at the time of her sentencing, used stolen identities, personal information belonging to real people who had not consented to its use, to fraudulently apply for pandemic-related unemployment assistance through the Massachusetts Department of Unemployment Assistance and 5 other state workforce agencies. She also used stolen identities to submit fraudulent applications for economic injury disaster loans, a federal program administered by the Small Business Administration that was established specifically to help small businesses survive the economic impact of the pandemic. The total amount her schemes sought to obtain exceeded $1.5 million. In March 2023, Miller pleaded guilty in federal court to 3 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of aggravated identity theft. On September 7, 2023, United States District Court Chief Judge F. Dennis Saylor sentenced her to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay restitution in an amount to be determined by the court. At the time of sentencing, Acting United States Attorney Joshua S. Saltzman made a statement about the case that drew a direct connection between Miller's social media life and her criminal conduct, noting that she was not an influencer but a convicted felon, that she had stolen the identities of innocent people to take over $1.2 million in pandemic relief funds that should have gone to people in genuine need, and that in a quest for social media recognition she had relied on fraud to fund what she described as a lavish lifestyle of private jets and luxury apartments. The statement concluded that the sentence made clear that building a social media presence on the backs of hardworking taxpayers is a path to prison, not to fame. Number 8. Tyler Bassetti, the real estate investment influencer from Columbus. Tyler Bassetti was a social media influencer based in Columbus, Ohio, who used his online platforms to present himself as a successful real estate investor with a proven track record and a proprietary investment program that could deliver significant returns to those who chose to participate. He was 31 years old and had built a following that allowed him to reach potential investors not just locally but across the United States and internationally, and he used that reach with considerable effectiveness to attract people who were looking for investment opportunities and who saw in his confident, knowledgeable online presence a reason to trust him with their money. His real estate investment program was described to potential investors in terms that suggested legitimacy and a well-established process, and from 2019 until 2023 he collected money from dozens of investors who had no reason to believe they were participating in anything other than a genuine investment opportunity. According to federal court records and the official announcement from the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio, Bassetti received more than $23 million in investments from people throughout the United States and abroad during the period his scheme was operating. The investment program, however, was not what it appeared to be. Rather than investing the funds as promised, Bassetti operated what prosecutors characterized as a Ponzi scheme, a fraudulent investment structure in which money from newer investors is used to pay returns to earlier investors, creating the appearance of a functioning and profitable program while the actual underlying investment activity either does not exist or is far smaller than represented. In the course of running this scheme, Bassetti also committed tax fraud to support and conceal his criminal activity. The investigation into his conduct was carried out by IRS Criminal Investigation and the Federal Bureau of Investigation working in coordination. In total, according to the official record, dozens of investors lost more than $11 million as a result of his scheme. In April 2026, Tyler Bassetti appeared in federal court in Columbus, Ohio, and was sentenced to 72 months in prison, which amounts to 6 years, announced by United States Attorney Dominic S. Gerace II. The case was presented by prosecutors as a clear example of the federal government's commitment to pursuing those who use social media platforms and the trust of online audiences to commit financial crimes against ordinary people who have placed their faith in someone who appeared credible and knowledgeable. Number 9. Rossi Lorathio Adams II, known online as Polo, founder of State Snaps. Rossi Lorathio Adams II was a social media entrepreneur from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, who had built a platform called State Snaps while he was enrolled as a student at Iowa State University, and who at his peak had accumulated more than 1 million followers across Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter through content that featured videos and photographs of young adults engaged in behavior that was crude, explicit, and deliberately provocative in its design. State Snaps was the kind of platform that existed at the intersection of social media voyeurism and spectacle, and it attracted a large audience precisely because of the nature of its content, which was designed to shock and entertain in equal measure. Adams built this platform into a genuine business, one with a monetizable following and an established presence in the social media landscape, and for a period of time it represented a functioning, if controversial, media enterprise. But the path that led Rossi Adams from building a social media company as a college student to being sentenced to 14 years in federal prison ran through a decision that was both reckless and criminal in a way that went far beyond the controversial nature of his content. What Adams wanted, according to federal prosecutors in the Northern District of Iowa, was to obtain control of a specific internet domain, a web address that he believed was connected to his business interests. The person who held that domain was not willing to simply hand it over, and Adams, rather than pursuing any legitimate avenue to resolve the dispute, decided to organize a conspiracy that involved using intimidation and the presence of a firearm to force the domain owner to transfer the domain. His co-conspirators carried out a confrontation at the residence of the domain holder, attempting to force the transfer of the domain through threats. This was a serious federal crime, a conspiracy to interfere with commerce by force, threats, and violence. And when federal investigators built their case against Adams and his co-conspirators, the evidence was sufficient to bring it to trial. Adams was found guilty by a federal jury in April 2019 on one count of conspiracy to interfere with commerce by force, threats, and violence. He was sentenced to 168 months in federal prison by United States District Court Judge C.J. Williams, which is 14 years behind bars. He was also ordered to pay $9,000 in restitution, nearly $4,000 in prosecution costs, and $22,000 in attorney fees. A detail that emerged during the proceedings added a particular dimension to the case. It was discovered during the legal process that while Adams had been using a court-appointed attorney and presenting himself as lacking financial resources, he had in fact continued to earn what the court described as significant amounts of money through his social media operations. He was sentenced in December 2019 and remains in federal prison. Number 10. Lori Loughlin, Massimo Giannulli, and the college admissions scandal that brought down a family built on social media. This final case is different from the others in this list in one important way. The person at the center of the social media story, the influencer whose carefully built online identity made this case resonate with millions of people, did not herself go to prison. But the people who went to prison went there specifically because of what they did to protect and advance that influencer's public image, and the collateral damage to that online identity was total and irreversible, which is why this story belongs on any list about the intersection of social media fame and criminal consequences. Olivia Jade Giannulli was one of the most recognizable beauty and lifestyle influencers on YouTube and Instagram in the late 2010s. A teenager who had grown up as the daughter of Full House actress Lori Loughlin and fashion designer Massimo Giannulli, and who had leveraged that background and her own considerable on-camera personality into a following of millions of people who watched her content about makeup, fashion, and her college life at the University of Southern California. She had brand deals with major companies including Sephora and Tresemme. She had millions of followers. She was, in the specific landscape of lifestyle influencing, a genuinely prominent figure. And her parents, who were wealthy and connected and determined to give their daughters every possible advantage, made a decision in connection with Olivia Jade's college admissions process that would eventually send both of them to federal prison and blow apart the family's public image in a way that no amount of social media management could repair. In March 2019, federal prosecutors announced charges against dozens of wealthy parents as part of an investigation called Operation Varsity Blues, which had uncovered a widespread scheme in which a college admissions consultant named William Rick Singer was accepting large payments from wealthy families to fraudulently secure their children's admission to elite universities through a variety of deceptive methods, including bribing athletic coaches to designate non-athlete applicants as recruited athletes. Lori Loughlin and Massimo Giannulli were among the parents charged. According to court documents, the couple had paid $500,000 to Singer to have Olivia Jade and her sister Isabella Rose falsely designated as crew team recruits for the University of Southern California, a sport neither girl had ever participated in. A phony athletic profile was created for Olivia Jade, including a photograph of her on a rowing machine, which was submitted to the USC Athletic Admissions Committee to support the fraudulent recruitment designation. Court documents further revealed that Olivia Jade had been instructed on how to keep the arrangement concealed from her high school guidance counselor. Both Lori Loughlin and Massimo Giannulli initially maintained their innocence and rejected early plea offers, but they ultimately pleaded guilty in May 2020 to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and mail fraud. At sentencing in August 2020, Lori Loughlin received a 2-month prison sentence, a fine of $150,000, 2 years of supervised release, and 100 hours of community service. Massimo Giannulli, who prosecutors characterized as having played a more active role in the scheme, was sentenced to 5 months in prison, a fine of $250,000, 2 years of supervised release, and 250 hours of community service. Both served their sentences. The sentencing judge noted at the hearing that this was not simply overzealous parenting. It was criminal, and it was deserving of prison time. Olivia Jade lost her brand partnerships with Sephora and Tresemme. She left the University of Southern California. The social media identity she had built over years was dismantled in a matter of weeks, replaced by a very different kind of public narrative. She has since returned to social media and attempted, with partial success, to rebuild her following, but the story of her family's involvement in Operation Varsity Blues remains permanently attached to her name and to the image she spent years constructing.